Bloodworth here with scrollsawforum.com. Wanted to do a little tutorial on cutting, simple scroll saw cutting. Some of you out there are beginners and it might be a little intimidating sometimes. I mean, even cutting a straight line on a scroll saw can be difficult. So I made up a little guide here that will apply to a piece of wood like this, and then we'll go ahead and start cutting it out, and I'll show you the different techniques that I use. It doesn't mean they're necessarily right, they're just the techniques that work for me, and it'll give you some ideas of, you know, the best way to handle certain cuts on the scroll saw. So at this point, let's go ahead and get the pattern applied. I'll give you a quickie little tutorial on how to apply the pattern to this if you hadn't done it before, and we'll go ahead and get started. Before we apply the pattern on a piece of wood, I just wanted to go over it real quick with you so you get an idea of what we're actually going to try to accomplish here. This pattern guide gives you the opportunity to practice many of the different types of cuts that you'll come across while scrolling. Starting off with line A will work left to right. A typical straight line cut, which, believe it or not, is probably the more difficult cut you're going to have to make. B is another straight line cut, which we will also add some 90-degree angles in here, plus a little intersection. C is just more angle cuts or 90-degree straight line cuts. D will give you some practice on curves. E is just a spiral along with a couple circles, an inside circle and an outside circle. And then F is basically the final exam. If you can cut F without a problem, then you're good to go. You don't need to do any more practice cutting. You can just go work on your projects. The final exam also has a couple little different cuts in here called veining cuts, and this could also be considered a veining line down here on the intersection. So we'll get into that as well. If you haven't actually located the pattern yet, it is in the description links below. Just click on one of the links and you'll be able to pull this pattern up and simply print it out. Now we'll go apply the pattern. In order to prepare your wood for the pattern, we need to cut it out. As you can see, I cut mine out on my table saw. You can use a bandsaw or scroll saw, whatever your preference is. Once it's cut out, we want to apply blue painter's tape to the one side of the board. This will help the blade stay lubricated throughout the cutting process, and it also makes the pattern easier to remove in the end. To cut your pattern out, you could use a pair of scissors, or you could do it the way I did it here and use an X-Acto knife and a straight edge. Once it's cut out, we need to apply some spray adhesive to the back side of the pattern. You simply put it in your little boxes. You see, I have a little spray box that I use for all my pattern spraying. It comes in really handy. After you spray the pattern, you pick it up, let it sit for 10-15 seconds to give the glue a bit of tackiness. Then you can go ahead and apply it to your piece of wood. And once it's applied, you do want to squeegee out all the little bubbles that appear so that it goes on nice and smooth. Now that the pattern's applied, we can go ahead and drill out our little entry holes that we need to. So let's head over to the drill press and we'll go from there. Drilling holes is pretty much straightforward and simple. There are a couple things that I want to point out that will make the process even better for you. You want to make sure you have nice straight holes, and you want to try to avoid tear out on the back of the hole once you drill the hole. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that our drill bit is 90 degrees to the table. That is what is going to keep our hole straight when we drill it. If you don't have a drill press, you can use a hand drill and just do your best to keep the bit straight as you're going through it. It's much more important on thicker wood that your drill bit is perpendicular to the table or at 90 degrees. The thicker the wood, the more deflection the bit will give, and it will give you a crooked hole going in from the top to the bottom, and we really don't want that. So we want to make sure that our drill bit goes in and stays straight throughout the entire hole drilling process. So we do that by using something that we know is known 90-degree angles, and I have these little blocks that I use for squaring my scroll saw up that work perfect, and we simply bring it down and eyeball it, and as you can see, that bit is pretty darn close to being perfectly parallel to the table. As long as the table is parallel, you won't have any problems. The second thing we want to do is make sure, to avoid tear out, that we use a backer block. As you can see, I've used this one quite a bit for drilling already. The most important thing on drilling holes to prevent tear out is that we use a nice flat piece of wood. This is just a piece of 3/4 inch plywood scrap that I had. Works great because it's nice and flat. I'm going to change the blade real quick, and I want to show you how to avoid tear out and what causes tear out. With the bigger bit installed, I'm going to go ahead and drill a hole without the backer board so you can see what tear out actually looks like. As you can see, it's hard to see the hole because it didn't really go through very well. So now we'll do the same hole using a nice clean piece on our backer board, and we'll drill the same hole again. Now see, that's a nice clean hole because there was no gap between this wood and this wood. Whenever there's a gap, when the drill bit exits the wood, is when you get tear out. As long as there's something perfectly flat behind the hole as you put the drill through it, you won't have tear out. Now, a situation like this, I see it all the time. I see videos and people use a board like this, but they'll make the mistake of cutting or drilling their hole over spots that are already used. So I'm going to pick a spot here that is not flat and has previous holes in it, and we'll drill a hole there and see what happens. See, there's our hole drilled out on the backer board, but it was not drilled in a flat spot. It was drilled over other holes that were already cut. The intention is good, but the outcome is pretty much no different than the first hole we had. You gotta get all this stuff off, and it's real ugly and not something you'd be proud of. So the bottom line is, even if you have a backer board, always drill a hole in a fresh spot. That's the one we just drilled out again, and you won't have to worry about tear out. One more thing, a warped piece of wood won't work either, because if the board is warped or cupped, you'll still have an air gap between the exit of the project piece of wood and the backer board. Anytime there is a gap, you want it nice and flat like this. Anytime there is a gap between there, you're going to get tear out. So that's something to watch for when you're drilling holes. Okay, now on to the project. I want to find a nice spot here. I've got a 16th inch bit here, which you can find comes in pretty much any drill saw or drill bit index. You always seem to have a 16th inch bit. So let's go ahead and drill out two of our holes here. Okay, that's the last hole on drilling out our little project. Most of the time a 16th inch bit is going to work for you. My theory is always to go bigger than smaller when it comes to cutting your holes for scroll saw projects, because it's easier to get the blade in and out while you're actually cutting. Let's get to the fun part now, and we'll start cutting some of these little lines out.